we're going to touch a little bit on regulating the industry. Some of those early successes that built the foundation of where we are today in 2020. I think some of the key landmark early decisions, not only by policymakers, but by industry itself, recognizing that they needed that strong foundation in which to operate and to have a sustainable industry in the Commonwealth to demonstrate to the communities in which they were operating that they were going to do it right, and they were as committed to doing that as the citizens in those communities. And how do we measure progress? That's the topic and the key takeaway, I think, from today's session. What can we point to in 2020? I think there's many things that we can point to, but want to talk a little bit about some of those measurable progress steps that we have achieved to date. So let's jump into it. In the beginning, 2008, 2007, 2008, not a lot of drilling going on, as we all know. We were setting the stage for that here in Pennsylvania, but you've got this new industry, these new players that have come to Pennsylvania. You've got some old players who have been around in Pennsylvania and have been active for many, many years, but they're dipping their toe in this Marcellus Shale. They're testing out some of the resources that they have. They're introducing themselves maybe to some new communities they had not been active in before. So a lot going on at this point in time, really before we saw a lot of heavy drilling and production that was occurring. I looked back to have a baseline from an activity standpoint compared to where we are here in 2020. A quick baseline on that. We've got about 11,000 wells here in Pennsylvania. We're producing north of 6.5 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, making us the second largest producer. Well, back then in 2008, we had maybe 400 wells. We produced less than 4% of the natural gas back then as we are today. So really at the infancy and the foundation. But what was going on? Something that was really big in 2008, obviously, was the Great Recession. The housing bubble had burst. Both federal and state governments were looking at significant deficits. Folks were looking for jobs to take care of their families, put food on the table. So the backdrop of Marcellus Shale was really, at a time in hindsight that was fortunate for the Commonwealth, because as the entire country and indeed the world was dealing and reeling with the Great Recession, there was a glimmer of hope, and that glimmer of hope was Marcellus Shale. We saw it start to really manifest itself in a big way here in Pennsylvania when the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources that oversees our state parks and forests put out for lease to see if there was any interest in developing some of our state forest lands with respect to oil and gas. A long history of natural gas development on public lands in Pennsylvania, something that the regulators, the agency was familiar with, many of the players and the operators were familiar with as well. But no one was prepared for the interest that we saw. I have here a reference to the $430 million in bonus payments that was received by the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources over the period of 3 lease sales in 2008 and 2009. To put in context, that's probably 5 to 7 times the total amount that had been generated by the state agency in prior 3 to 4 decades. So it was a number that certainly got their attention, and it got the attention of our elected officials. It got the attention of, at the time, Governor Rendell and our state legislative leaders that wanted to examine if there were future opportunities to also responsibly lease our state forests. And what does that hold for the opportunity for private landowners across Pennsylvania as well. So you saw a significant focus at this time on leasing and acquiring that resource. And then you see the third bullet point here, and let's just throw it out there. A lot of the oxygen was consumed at that time about what state government specifically can do to maximize its revenue potential beyond just the bonus payments and the royalty payments that would come from the activity. And so you saw in the legislature and in the administration a significant focus on talking about a severance tax in Pennsylvania. Came kind of close to enactment. It passed one house in 2010. Couldn't quite get across the finish line from a policy proposal in 2010, but it was certainly front and center. And it was looked at from a few ways. One, parity with other states, ensuring that there's some revenue realized by the taxpayers of Pennsylvania. And again, two, providing the resources to the Commonwealth in light of the Great Recession and the deficits that were being faced by communities across Pennsylvania to inject some revenue to address some of those shortfalls that we had seen. Some key challenges from the industry side as well as from the elected official and the policymaker side that I want to talk about. First and foremost, workforce. You know, it wasn't all that long ago, and in some quarters, maybe we still talk about it and chuckle on it every once in a while about the white pickup trucks and the out-of-state license plates. And that's really a harbinger for the conversation happening at this time about what's in it for me, and from a very enlightened self-interest perspective, meaning are there job opportunities? Are there job opportunities for my children and my grandchildren? Generational opportunities. You know, Pennsylvania has struggled for many years from a brain drain where we educate folks and then they have to go and look elsewhere for gainful employment and to raise their families. So significant focus on workforce. How can we ramp up the education and training opportunities in Pennsylvania so that those who are coming to Pennsylvania or expanding have confidence that those who are doing the work have the skills and the trade and the know-how in which to do what they need to do in what is a very highly technical industry. Impacts on water. You know, we're a water-rich state. We have, I think more than any other state in the nation, reliance upon private water wells and groundwater for our drinking water, particularly, of course, in rural areas. We drill more than 20,000 new water wells every single year in Pennsylvania, still do. And if you've got a farm or if you live on, somewhere that does not have public water, your well is your world. Meaning if anything goes wrong, you have significant challenges. And so it's important that industry worked at the time to protect groundwater and water supplies and assure both our regulators as well as the communities that their water was in fact going to be protected. A lot of conversation at the time about doing it right. What does that mean? You know, you ask 100 people, you get 100 different answers. A lot of times that conversation dealt with a severance tax and new revenue to the Commonwealth, and any of the ails or concerns that folks had would be addressed if but for a severance tax. Others had very different ideas of that. It meant educating that workforce. It meant raising the bar on environmental standards and performance that was held within the communities in which operators were active. So a lot of conversation on, quote, doing it right, trying to define that so that there were some actionable items for, especially on the elected official side and our policymakers to pursue. And workforce, I throw that in there again just to reiterate the significant importance of that communities were looking for opportunities again, that their local citizens and the generations to come would have opportunities right here, would not have to work and move out of state. Regulating the industry, I want to talk a little bit about some of the key early steps, both by policymakers, but also industry. And really there was a partnership. Industry recognized and put a lot of these challenges and these concerns to be addressed on the radar of regulators as well as elected officials. They recognized that, again, you needed that strong foundation, the confidence not only for the communities, but frankly, their peers around them. There's a recognition within the industry that you were all judged by the least common denominator, and so we need to raise the bar for all. Early on, I'll touch on a few of these, DEP oversight. Oil and gas in 2008 was a small bureau within DEP. They had 64 employees. They mostly dealt with legacy issues from our oil and natural gas drilling and development in northwestern Pennsylvania. Sort of had hummed along for a little while. And then all of a sudden, inundated with applications for drilling, for well pads, for pipelines, impoundments, all the activities that go along with a new and expanding industry. So there was a need to provide the resources there. We saw that early in 2010, again in 2013, and even more recently, where the permitting fees were raised, that revenue driven back to hire additional employees for DEP. Water well protections, we talked about that challenge early on. We saw some concrete action in 2010 and into 2011, finalizing the casing and cementing standards that shale gas wells would need to adhere to. Waterway impacts, I know my colleague Katie Klaber is going to talk a little bit about this in more detail, but this was a critical issue and certainly one that industry put on the radar of regulators, which is concern about discharges into public waterways. A lot of wastewater at the time was taken to publicly owned treatment facilities. There was some concern about the discharges there, and industry needed to look, and so did regulators, at alternate ways in which to handle that wastewater, principally to this day through recycling and reuse of that. The Marcellus Shale Advisory Commission, something I got to be involved with Governor Corbett in 2011. We talk about that doing it right. This was an effort to bring together industry, environmentalists, local government, state agency officials in charge with overseeing this industry to really step back and look at a comprehensive plan on both investment in jobs and training, raising the environmental bar, talking about revenue, whether it was a severance tax or in this case, an impact fee that came out of that, and really having a comprehensive plan and approach from state government on how we're going to maximize the benefits of this shale resource that we're blessed to have, but also ensuring that it's done right, safely, and responsibly. Act 13 was a comprehensive rewrite. A lot of those recommendations flowed not only from the Advisory Commission, but from many legislators on both sides of the aisle, in both the House and the Senate, who had started to introduce individual bills in response to issues that had been raised. So you saw a rewrite of Pennsylvania's Oil and Gas Act, first comprehensive rewrite in over 30 years, stands, I think, as a testament and a foundation to where we are today, but also has been replicated, many of its provisions in other states that have seen shale development. And pipeline safety, in 2011, the legislature passed Act 127, which ensured that our state agencies, specifically our Public Utility Commission, had oversight and regulatory oversight to ensure that pipelines that are regulated at the federal level are done safely and responsibly, particularly those that were being built out in areas of the Commonwealth that had not seen prior development. And finally, some measurable progress. Let's fast forward a little bit. Those 12 years go by pretty fast. There's lots of measurable progress that we can point to. I want to focus on three of them. And principally because a lot of times the conversations around shale, and it frustrates, I'm sure, many of us on this, are more simply limited to local benefits, whether it's jobs or capital investment. And we need to step back sometimes and say that we're all in this together, but we're all benefiting from this as well. So while the bulk of development and production may be occurring in the northern tier in the Northeast or in Southwest Pennsylvania, we're all, as Pennsylvanians, in all 67 of our counties, benefiting. One of the things that's critical to the industry and very proud of is the measurable progress on environmental compliance. You see that there north of 98%. Hard to find an industry that has either a higher environmental compliance rate in Pennsylvania or is under the level of scrutiny as the oil and gas industry is. Over 19,000 inspections just last year, and yet a significant environmental compliance. Again, never satisfied until we get to 100. We can always do better, but let's recognize the bar has been raised. Lower energy prices, everyone pays an electric price, an electric bill in Pennsylvania. Half of us, hopefully more, but half of us have natural gas service in our homes. Many more businesses rely upon it as well, and that's really the opportunity that we have today, is that downstream build out. You can see, we're not talking marginal percentages here. We're talking upwards of 40% in electricity and close to 70% in some quarters on natural gas. This is translating to north of $2,000, $2,500 in savings per household, and magnify that for businesses and manufacturers. So significant benefit to all Pennsylvanians. In cleaner air, we've done all of this development at a time that has seen significant measurable progress with respect to air quality. You see some of those key criteria pollutants and how far they've come just over the last 15 years as natural gas has been an increasing percentage of our generation portfolio. And we're proud as an industry of the contributions. We've got fewer respiratory ailments, hospitalizations, a significant public health benefit derived from the air quality progress that we've made. These are just a few of them. I know we want to continue on into this conversation, so I appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you.
But where we've come to in 2020 is you've got an organization like Stronger looking at our regulations, but if I'm not mistaken, you even know of other states that will look to Pennsylvania to say we need to sort of we need to regulate and legislate like they do. Am I correct in that we're a sort of a premier leader, if you would?
You're absolutely right, and I think we've all spent some time. I know many of the panelists here, and I'm sure many of our guests today as well, talking with those out-of-state folks. They've come here to Pennsylvania on fact-finding missions and tours. They want to see what it's like out there in the field. They've talked to our regulators, elected officials. We've seen not only from other states, but indeed other nations as well. So I think it's absolutely fair to say that Pennsylvania has been, sort of set the baseline for that, and has been helping to raise the bar in a lot of jurisdictions around the country and indeed around the world on that.
The question that came in was, if you would talk about what was your earliest, biggest hurdle. And again, go back to, maybe when you were in the state Senate transitioning to Corbett. What at that time frame was your biggest hurdle in the eyes of the elected officials?
Well, I think it was trying to stay ahead of the narrative that others were trying to define a bit. And what I mean by that is, early on there were glimpses of potential and benefits, from economics and revenue to energy security to cleaner air. We started to see that. We wanted to see it realized, but we started to see that. But, even then, we still lived in a 24/7 news cycle. And, folks were acquiring information, being elected officials, their constituents who were contacting them. I read this online, I read that. This must be happening. And I think trying to stay ahead of that, to say, well, we're catching our breath here, but as we catch our breath, we're continuing to walk forward because this is a good thing, and we want to make sure that we do, in fact, do it right and attract investment and let folks know Pennsylvania is open for business here with respect to shale development. But it's difficult to try and to capture in the time we have the misconceptions. Some of them genuine, not all of them intended to intentionally mislead. Folks have legitimate questions about the activity that they're seeing. So you want to serve as a resource to them so they can make informed decisions, about their own family situation, perhaps if they're contemplating leasing, or to elected officials. You also want to stay ahead of and try and correct and redirect a bit the narrative that may be, creating misperceptions about the industry and its activities.
One of the questions that's coming in is, because of your experience of being there at the beginning to today, it's, what do you see that's that ongoing challenge today? And how do you today at the MSC look at new elected officials? What are the first couple things you explain to them about our industry today?
Yeah, it's a reminder. You look at the elected officials in our state legislature, and it's true at the local level as well. Significant turnover. So some of the battles and the accomplishments that we can all point to 10, 12 years ago, the recipe that went into trying to get that product, they weren't familiar with it. They weren't part of that, and that's understandable. And so we have to constantly educate and do it in a way that's credible, that they can have confidence to say, yeah, we had this conversation, this is where we settled, and this is how it's played out over those years. That will never go away. But it's particularly pronounced today because we have seen in the last several election cycles significant turnover. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to educate, to reinforce the benefits, but it's also an obligation to ensure that they're informed, so when they're talking to their constituents who stop them at the supermarket, that they can credibly speak to the issue with confidence.
We're beyond the 1 o'clock hour. I don't know if Pat or Katie, you have any closing comments you want to. I'll give you that opportunity, and then I'll end it with my own closer.
I too want to say thank you very much, George, for the invitation. Those who were able to join today. It's important as this program says to think about energy, to pause and not just simply give a reaction, but really think about it. And that's what your forum has enabled us to do. So I'm appreciative. And to the point that you just raised, George, about a lot of promises were made by industry early on, but time needed to pass for those to play out. And I think that we can look back with pride in 2020 to a lot of promises kept and the track record that we've seen over the last 10, 12 years. And I think that just bolsters us going forward, that there's some credibility there and integrity on the industry side as we look to build future opportunities. So appreciate the forum and the invitation.